two ends of the pipe. One is spitting out this incredible resource of graduating 20-somethings, right? Wanting to change the world, faith and ignorance beautifully combined. And then there's this other side of the pipe, which is probably even quite a bit bigger, which is unreached peoples, right? Whatever number you want to use, 6,000, 7,000 unreached peoples, a fourth to a third of the world that don't have any access to the gospel. And we're like, man, what would it look like to try to connect this incredible resource with this incredible need?
You're listening to the Sent Ones podcast, where we help disciples of Jesus discover their calling, develop their skills, and get deployed to their mission.
All right. Welcome back to the Sent Ones podcast. Really excited as we continue to jump into season 2 and talking about what does it look like to develop your skills as a Sent One. And our guest today, I think, has a lot of experience in that. I'm really excited to hear both the stories and some of what they have going on in the ministry he's involved with. But Andy, I just love for you to introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about what it is you do, and then we'll jump into some questions from there.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me, first of all, guys. Fun to be with you guys. Hey, I grew up in this great metropolis called Iowa, more pigs than people. So that's a fun one. And grew up in a pretty monocultural part of Iowa, like real small town. Went to Iowa State University, jumped into college ministry after that. So did my wife. She did Navigators. I did a church-based one. And really, it was out of that college ministry where God began to grow our heart for the world and began to learn about the unreached and the fact that, there's people in the world that don't have access to the gospel, the least reached. And so we started seeing more and more like these college students that wanted to change and affect the world. Kind of talk about two ends of the pipe. Now I live in Texas, so maybe I'll use the oil, example. Two ends of the pipe. One is spitting out this incredible resource of graduating 20-somethings, right? Wanting to change the world, faith and ignorance beautifully combined. And then there's this other side of the pipe, which is probably even quite a bit bigger, which is unreached peoples, right? And whatever number you want to use, 6,000, 7,000 unreached peoples, a fourth to a third of the world that don't have any access to the gospel. And we're like, man, what would it look like to try to connect this incredible resource with this incredible need? And so that's what we jumped into almost 2 decades ago, 16, 17 years ago, by God's grace. And the Lord has just blessed that. We live in Austin, Texas now. Been married for 22 great years to my wife, Jamie, 4 kids, twins that are seniors. So the house is going to change drastically next year. 15-year-old sophomore who's learning to drive, and our son, Jamin, who's excited to put pads on for the first time and try football out. So that's the crew. That's what we're doing here in Austin.
That's amazing. So maybe fill in just a little bit of gaps. What did that practically look like? I love that illustration of the two pipes, but what does that look like for you? Feel free to tell us about Launch Global. I'd just love to hear how some of those pieces have come together.
Yeah, I think initially we thought we were going to, we always joked and said we're going to be the eHarmony of the missions world and kind of connect, students with opportunities and, hopefully it'd be lifelong. And, but I think pretty soon when this was back in, 2007 or so in Iowa, we started realizing, man, we really don't know how to teach people how to make disciples, and not just kind of that older believer meets with a younger believer. We joke and call it Denny's discipleship. Sometimes you meet in a coffee shop or whatever. And that's not bad. There's that mentoring we see in the Bible. Barnabas had Paul, Paul had Timothy, et cetera, et cetera. But in a real kind of Matthew 28 kind of way, when Jesus sends out the 12, when he says, go therefore and make disciples, he wasn't telling the boys to find a partner and meet for coffee in the Starbucks of Jerusalem, right? He was telling them to go you can still go to the coffee shop, but make new disciples in the different spheres of influence. And so we realized, man, if all we do is transport folks that have been a part of our college ministry, or maybe even sometimes churches, most of them don't really know what it means to make a disciple. And if you can't make a disciple, you're sure as heck not going to be able to plant a church, because the core of any church planting effort has to be disciple making. And so we said, man, we got to figure out together with these folks, how do we actually teach people to make disciples? And maybe it's just because I'm from small town Iowa, but I was like, I think the best way to do it is just try to do it with them. And so we started this journey of what does it look like to share the good news with our Muslim friends, and can we see them follow Jesus? And if they say yes, then what do we do? And how does it go forth into their families? And so I would just say we joke sometimes, guys, and say we do a little less wrong every year, and the Lord just keeps being kind to us. And I would say back in 2011, though, there was a real kind of switch that began to happen. And if I'm honest, guys, we really there were three couples that kind of helped start what is now Launch Global. We started it out of spite for the local church, like the legacy church. Because we were like, we're going to show the local church how to make disciples. We're going to show them how to pray. We're going to show them just arrogant, cocky, prideful. And really, the Lord was really kind. About a year and a half before we moved to Texas in 2011, the Lord just said, man, the local church is messed up because it's filled with people just like you. And anybody can rip on her. But my work is to make her as beautiful as she's meant to be. And there was this switch that happened in Jamie and I's heart about 2010, where we said, what would it look like to come alongside and with the local church, see her really embrace, own, be passionate about the Great Commission. And so there's just a real switch for us that happened. So when God opened a door for us to jump in with the Austin Stone down here in Austin, we were like, man, here's our opportunity. And so we really even made a vow to just say, hey, we are not, no matter what we find out, because we know the church isn't going to be perfect. When no matter what we find out, we are not going to speak ill of her, especially behind closed doors. And we're just going to build her up, and we're going to try to do what Jesus calls us all to do, which is make her as beautiful as she can be. And so that model, guys, of actually Launch Global, it was a different name then, doing the same thing though, coming inside the local church and really letting the name disappear, because people, I'll keep using the stone as the example, already trusted the Austin Stone. Right. And so rather than introducing another entity, it was the missions pastor there. He said, why don't you take what's now Launch Global? It was called Every Ethne back in the day. Why don't you take it and put it inside of the Austin Stone and be the church's mobilization team? And we're like, we don't care about the name. All we care about is unreached peoples worshiping Jesus. So that's what we did. And after 2 years, man, that started gaining traction. And then we're like, wow, what if there are we know there has to be, what if we found other churches that had how I would describe the Austin Stone, that had a vision to reach the unreached, to see them worship Jesus, to plant reproducing churches there, but didn't really have the infrastructure or the pipeline. And could we help provide that pipeline for them? And so that's kind of how this thing started. And so then we started working in other churches. And now, by God's grace, I think we're in over 20 different cities and 25 different churches doing it this way. So
that's beautiful, man. I love that. Andy, I love that kingdom heart, man, because you don't see it very often, I mean, it's so easy for us to get things backwards and to care more about what flag is on it, what sticker's on the wall, what brand it is, who gets the credit, who gets the glory. And just that open-handed posture, man, that you're talking about, it should be way more common, but it is very rare to have an organization like that say, hey, listen, we'll come in and we don't care if our name's on it or not. We just want to help mobilize people into the harvest and into the nations. Yeah. I mean, how beautiful is that, bro? That's incredible. Yeah. And I'm so glad you shared that, man. Absolutely. Yeah. One question, man, I'd love for you to unpack a little bit for us. So whether it's within a local church setting or not, talk to me through the development pathway, because we're in season 2 right now of our podcast. Season 1 was all about discovering your calling. How do you discover what God's calling you to do? Season 2 now, we're talking about developing your skills, developing your heart and rhythms in order to accomplish what God's called you to. I know Launch Global has an incredible development pathway. I think it's like a 9-month journey you take people on.
Yeah.
Can you unpack for us what that looks like? How have you guys over the years built that pathway to develop people as they're being sent out?
Yeah, you bet. And like I said, man, I look back at what we were doing back in Iowa, and I'm just like, oh Lord, you had grace, but I would just it would not be fun to have that as a reality TV show, and I think that's what the Lord always does in our lives, right? He keeps, if we'll keep learning and keep saying, Lord, we know we don't have it all together, we know that there's more of you, there's better ways, let us keep learning. Like he keeps doing that. And so hopefully 5 years from now, 10 years from now, we're all doing the same thing, looking back and saying, oh man, remember 2024, I think two things, you said it right, Josh, like there's I would say the 9-month kind of training time is kind of maybe the bread and butter. But before people come into that, we kind of sometimes joke about the chemex of mobilization. And so you've got a lot of things on the very top that are kind of going in, and these are your different feeder systems. Usually we're talking about in the context of like a local legacy church. So you've got short-term trips, you've got perspectives classes or mission of God, or, you've got international outreach or diaspora outreach. You've got even just different evangelism pushes. All these things kind of flow into the next level of the chemex. And we would say we want to see two main ingredients happen in a person's life before they get into that 9-month. The 9-month kind of being that sweet spot, right? Where the coffee turns to water and the water turns to coffee. And it does that because it slows down. And so rather than trying to get people over fast, I heard somebody say one time, if you go fast, you're gonna come home fast. And I would just encourage people that are listening, that are trying to figure out, man, is it really worth me sticking around a year or 3 years or whatever the time is to go? And I would just say, man, do you want your doctor to prepare? Did you want him to just kind of fly through, cheat by, and just kind of barely, it's like, no, you want the doctor that took his time or her time and did really well. It's the same thing. How much more so when it comes to planning, reproducing churches among those who have never heard. And so those two main ingredients for us that need to go in before is some kind of disciple making experience, not just a knowledge, definitely not just a classroom, but Josh, if I'm in your group, you're taking me out in the streets and we're going out in Austin or Indianapolis or wherever, and you're showing me what does it look like to start conversations, and it really doesn't matter if you want to use Shema statements or you want to use like a high filter and share the bridge at the beginning, but I'm watching you. And then it's just that mall thing, right? Model, assist, watch, launch, or leave, whatever. And whichever generation of it you learn.
I'm sure you prefer launch just because of the name of your organization, but
we're biased,
yeah, go ahead.
We're biased. But so that has to, and so we'd say at minimum, you should be doing that for 10, 15. And again, it's less about the amount of time, and it's more about you getting to the place where you're comfortable, so much so that you're able to turn around and begin to do that with your other friends. And so some of those skills piece, and we'll come back to that here in a second. And the other one is a conviction for the unreached. And you guys, I actually was scrolling through the different podcasts people should go and listen to. You guys showed the graphic from the Lausanne thing. It's the 50-year anniversary, right, of Ralph Winter's 1974 famous thing. And this is why your city of, let's take Indianapolis, is different than India. And Josh, I don't have to tell you, right? But the way that we're going to finish the Great Commission is by people going and living among unreached peoples. I'm all about reaching diaspora. I'm all about trying to send some diaspora back. But God's major means, his primary means, I think, to finish the Great Commission is by people going and doing what he did, John chapter 1, and living, and the word became flesh and dwelt among them. And if there's not a dwelling among them, I don't think that's God's primary means. And Jesus didn't commute from heaven, even though I would have, like I wouldn't have hung out by the fire and, done all the camp stuff. I would have just commuted. And he didn't. He dwelt among. And I think that's how. And so that conviction for the unreached and disciple making, that has to flow into the 9-month group. So then what happens in the 9-month group, right? And man, if there's folks out there and they want to see what we got, guys, we want to share. It's been given to us. Freely we have received, freely we shall give. So if people want to see what we're doing, man, we are not looking to make money. We're not looking to hold it back here. It's like, if you want to try to do it with people, but here's my encouragement is there has to be this. It's Mark 3:14. Jesus chose 12 apostles that he might be with them and then send them out to preach. And a lot of times we skip to the sending part, but we don't do the with part. And so we help people convictionally, but we don't actually show them how to do it. And so whether it be in our 10-week thing that we do or the 9-month, there's so much that happens with. So we're not going to talk about prayer. You're just going to come to my living room 5:30 day after day after day, and we're just going to pray together. And you're going to grow in your capacity to pray. And so, anyways,
do you have a 9 a.m. option, Andy, or is it just 5:30? I'm asking for a friend. I'm just asking for a friend.
Yeah, I got a friend and they just don't sleep well. They got a late night job, and some people are like, oh, so you do this with college students. So you can ask college students to have, and it's like, no, actually we do this with 20s and 30 somethings. We've even had a handful, not a lot, two women actually named Becky that were 63 that did it the same year. And so we've had the gamut. The majority
I had a buddy of mine, Andy, who was a lawyer. His wife was a veterinarian. They went through your 9-month program.
Yep.
And so they kept doing their job during that season.
That's right.
But they came and lived in a new place and went through the whole 9 months with a community of people.
That's it.
And so, you're right. It's not just young, single 20 somethings.
Yep.
We're talking about people from all different walks of life, which is beautiful.
That's right. And because life keeps going when you're overseas, right? When you live among the unreached, you're going to still have all the other things going on in life. And so even if you get to have the joy of giving the majority or all of your time to church planning, you have to figure out how to do that in the context of all the other pressures of life, because it makes you, one of the first nights we usually gather, we read through Acts 2 and we talk about, man, let's live like this. Who wants to live like this? We do, and then we ask the question, what's going to need to be surrendered in your life if you're going to live like this? Because the fallacy that we sometimes believe is, well, I want to live like Acts 2, but nothing else is going to change in my time or passions or energy. And that's just silly. There's going to have to be things that are surrendered from really trivial, like your favorite Netflix things, to like really serious, to like maybe how much you engage in another ministry opportunity, for example. And so we really have to help people. But if you look at that 9-month group, a lot of times we'll talk about, I'll try to make it simple because so much goes into it. But we talk about abiding, we talk about character, and we talk about skills. And as I was looking at the questions that we were going to look at, I'm like, man, we're one letter away from Acts. And I used to be on staff of the Baptist church. So I'm like, I'm a alliteration guy. So I'm like, okay, we can come up with theology. And so that we'll keep it like that: abiding, character, theology, and then skills. And so if you look at each of those, maybe I'll just give a little bit or tell a story. When it comes to abiding, if that's cool.
Hey, please, Andy, you take it, bro. Say whatever you want. We'll sit back and just listen, man. Okay.
All right.
Taking notes. Here we go.
I think on the abiding one, man, this is the crux. This is so much more than a Jesus juke. And I just remember, I've been in missions world for a while, and one of my questions that I'm always asking folks when they come back, workers, is how did you endure? How did you persevere? How did you keep going? And again and again and again, it was our communion with Jesus, abiding, whatever words you want to use in that space, that John 15. And it's not just, it's so so much more. Helping people see it's so much more than your quiet time in the morning. It's not less than that, but it's so much more. Like if you don't live in the identity of the beloved, right? Like when right before Jesus' baptism or at Jesus' baptism and on the transfiguration, this is my beloved son. Why is he beloved? He hasn't done anything publicly yet. And so if you can't get that in your loins, the biblical word, right? Like in your deep being, it's going to jack you up when you go to the field, because your worth is going to be in your position or your performance and or your fruit. And if you produce, then you feel great about yourself, but you're going to go through some years where it feels like you're walking in the wilderness. And so then you're sunk, you know? And so
Feeney, if we could name this episode "Get It in Your Loins," that would be great. If we could just go ahead and do that.
Luckily, AI will probably take care of that for us. We run the filter afterwards.
All right.
What phrase is going to in your loins? If you don't got Jesus in your loins, you ain't going to do well. That's just sum it all up right there.
That's
you know,
good.
I got a couple of buddies that make fun of me when I use that phrase. I'm like, dude, it's in the Bible, right?
Yeah,
Come on,
that's good.
you know.
That's good.
So really, that's the abiding piece, and helping people bring that into, you know, when I exercise, when I'm with my family, in my singleness, and I'm messing around. Like it is the abiding life. This idea of and like what is abiding? And I think real simple. It's surrendering and receiving. It's surrendering and receiving, noticing when you're not close to Jesus, saying, what do I need to surrender? And then receiving his peace, love, joy, whatever he wants to give you, because you are connected to him as a branch. And so anyways, there's the 30-second on abiding. But so that's number one. On the character piece, man, again, the best way to help character grow is to do things together, right? And so this is where we don't talk about, you know, evangelism, or, you know, if you're a 4 fields, 5 parts person, we try to enter into as many of those parts as we can. We probably do the most in the first 3 parts because we've only got 9 months together, and sometimes we get into 4, or we try to jump them into a current work that's happening in field 4 or 5. But as we're doing, especially those first 3 fields, man, your character, your patience or lack thereof, you know, how you do conflict, how you do team, how you feel about your singleness, how you parent, all these things are coming out. And that is so key. You guys have heard plenty of talks on, man, choose somebody with good character over gifts any day. And I would just say, man, just because your gifts are awesome and you had 50 Jesus conversations yesterday and saw 2 people come to Christ, what does your weekend look like? And are you able to put that on full display? And so does that all line up? And we're gonna push into that. The theology one, I wouldn't say we go, in some ways, we go as deep as what we feel like you need. In other words, because we're so local church centric, we're not trying to push certain theologies, but things like suffering, thinking about, because you will suffer, right? Unless a grain of wheat falls and dies, it remains alone. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. So the only way for you to bear fruit to some extent is through suffering. And so what you need a theology of suffering, and how do I deal with these things, these trials in my life when they come into my life? Thinking about the church. Again, we partner with an array, like 20, 25 different churches. And so there's an array of theologies of church, but it's not less than Acts 2, right? The end of Acts 2. And a lot of times we'll use that church circle and say, man, here are the 9 to 11 things, depending on the church, that we're trying to get into the circle. And at least at a basic level, can our people kind of come out of this 9 months and say, man, if I was going to start a church in a coffee shop, workout place, you know, where engineering firm in Nepal, India, Indonesia, I would be trying to get these things into the group of new believers. And then church multiplication. And I think that you guys know this, man, for whatever reason, movements are getting a lot of hits lately. And we want to put some Bible. We don't want to be anecdotal. We don't want to talk about numbers. We want to talk about the Bible and how when we look at Acts 13 and 14 or Acts 19 or Romans 15, how it's very clear that Jesus is about his church multiplying. This is not pragmatic. It is learning the scriptures and then it's an uncontrollable at the end of the day. And so anyways, we begin to step into some of those pieces. And the last one is skills. And this is where especially the 5 parts are coming in, or the one maybe that I'll also camp in on is when it comes to understanding your role on the team. I think sometimes when we talk about the unreached, the apes lean in, right? I'm talking about Ephesians 4:11, apostles, prophets, evangelists. The apes lean in, and the STs are kind of back there like, well, what is your definition of church? And what we need is this. It's the same thing as the legacy church and the simple church needing each other so desperately. The apes are dead without the STs, and the STs are dead without the apes. And if we don't figure out on the front end while we're training how these gifts complement each other, because guys, my wife would make fun of me all the time. I go into a gas station to pay. The guy's typically from Nepal here in Austin, and I get their phone number and I put it in my little pile. And she's like, "How many phone numbers you going to get before you follow up? Like you ain't followed up with a dang one of those." And I'm like, "Oh man, I suck." I love that initial conversation, but then when I'm in groups with STs, guess which part they hate and which part they're great at. They don't love starting the conversation, but they're great at following up. And so I just remember when Nick and Tiffany were in our group, and he's a strong ST, he's like, "Man, Andy, I'll take those numbers." And he would see those people come to faith. Whereas I wasn't even calling the numbers, right? I love getting them. And that's just one of the ways in which, man, if apes and STs can figure out how to work with each other. And again, some of this is like theology and skills kind of mashed together. The one other piece skills wise, and then I'll let you guys, direct it, but it's just the cross-cultural piece. And there are some things that translate real easy and some things that don't. And the first time that you talk to a Muslim shouldn't be when you go to Indonesia, right? You should be able to think through some questions like, "Hey, what does the Bible say about Muhammad?" Or what et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so thinking through some of those cross-cultural pieces as you're communicating the gospel are things that we're trying to do in that 9-month thing.
That's so good, Andy. Honestly, I heard a guy say recently, I don't know if I've said this on one of our podcasts before, but it really hit me. He was talking about all that you're talking about here. And he goes, "You want to go to China?" He's like, "You've not even shared the gospel in Panda Express." He's like, "Share the gospel here if you want to go to, go somewhere else." But I love that line. Just you're not even sharing in Panda Express and you want to go to China. Anyway, bro, just the intentionality of what you're talking about, Andy, is so key here. Really helping people walk and live that out. I mean, what it sounds to me, you're basically developing a 9-month community of practice where they get to practice together. They get to go out together. They're learning how to share the gospel. They're learning how to make disciples. They're being discipled in that process. I think that's beautiful, brother. And it's we need so much more of that. And we need so much more of that in every local church in the country, bro. Let me ask you a question that you can, let's say there's somebody out there right now that is, they love this. They're eating up what you're saying. Maybe it's a local church pastor, or maybe it's just a guy or gal who really is feeling called to the nations. How can they get connected to you guys? Like, what does that look like? And how could they, see if this might be a good fit for them?
Yep. So a couple thoughts. Number one is, you get on launchglobal.org. And again, guys, this is not about promotion or organization. I would say you could do the same thing in like NPL world, for example, but find a community of practice. And find a group of people. And I don't really care what the label is. It really doesn't matter what the label is, but where are there 3 to 5 to maybe up to 10 folks that are really trying to make disciples that make disciples that make disciples, because that's what leads to church planting. Again, if you can't get that basic thing down, you can't have pie without the crust, or not good pie, and so there has to be that fundamental community of practice, and there has to be a way for this abiding lifestyle to be talked about. You can get our 10-week group stuff online. We can put a couple links below. And like I said, we're in about 21 or so different cities that folks, if they want to move, we have folks every year. There's over 130 folks that are being trained this year. We have folks every year that aren't from those cities that move in. They find a job at, Amazon, UPS, Starbucks, whatever, just kind of a grocery store, whatever, and Uber Eats. And then really the main thing they're doing is this training with this group of people. And so, man, we'd love to send you, and then still to have your local church be the one that sends you. Come and do life with us for basically a year in one of these cities that's close or that just resonates. Maybe you've always wanted to live in California and you go see Sean in Riverside, right? Or whatever. And so that'd be probably, the easiest one to do.
Yeah, that's beautiful, Andy. Thank you for sharing that, man. Honestly, and we're going to wrap up right now. We've only got a couple minutes left, but one thing I want to say to anybody out there listening that just heard this story and heard, Andy unpack their journey and their pathway. I think here's a really important key here, guys. If you're feeling called and you feel like that the Lord has spoken to you, you want to be a sent one, you don't know if that's locally or globally or what that's going to look like, I think it's really important to pick a pathway. Like, there is a development pathway for you. Maybe it's with Launch Global, maybe it's with another organization, maybe it's with a local church. But at the end of the day, intentionality is going to be key on really making sure that you're being developed into all God's created you to be. You're being discipled, and you're able to learn how to make more disciples. You're able to share the gospel and show other people how to do the same thing. Are you a disciple that's able to reproduce more disciples? Are you a disciple worth reproducing in the first place? And are you a disciple that can go make more? I think those are two incredibly important questions as we talk about developing your skills and developing your heart and developing your character. And so, Andy, thank you so much, man, for unpacking this, for giving a super clear pathway. It was so good, man. And it's honestly challenged me on several different points as well, just thinking through. I mean, we just moved back to the States after 16 years overseas and been really trying to unpack what this next season looks like. And just the pathway that you're leading people on excites me, man. And it gets me pumped up about what is possible and how we may be able to raise up more people to go to the nations. And so I appreciate it, bro. Thanks for joining us today, man, and being on with us.
Yeah, thanks so much. So yeah, guys, check out launchglobal.com. We really highly recommend them. You've obviously heard sentones.com. You can find some simple guides to get started there, as well as connect directly to people that could plug you into places like Launch Global, like Andy's been talking about. So looking forward to the next episode. And thanks again, Andy. Appreciate it.
Hey, guys, thanks for listening to the Sent Ones podcast. For practical next steps or more content like this, check us out at sentones.com, or you can subscribe with your favorite podcast provider. Hope to see you guys next time.